I'm Kimberly Hayes Muga.
And I'm Amanda Day,
You're listening to Fundraising Heyday Podcast,
where we cover the how-tos of grants and fundraising.
And how we can all do a better job of changing the world in a positive way.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. We're super excited to announce that registration is officially open for our Grants Lab cohort training this fall.
Whoop, whoop.
Yes, we've mentioned this before, but can't say it enough. We've got education, we've got one-on-one coaching, we've got homework writing exercises, we've got feedback for you.
Okay. It's not homework.
Writing exercises.
It will help you be better able to bring in more grant funding.
Well, the idea is by the end of this 8-week course, you actually have a proposal that's pretty good, right? So those are your
And we're going to be reviewing past proposals with you, right? We're going to be holding your hand as we together walk through the world of major grant components. This is what I wish I had back in another century, literally and figuratively, when I began my grant writing career.
Yep. It'll give you the skills and confidence you need to write winning grant proposals, which that's what it's all about, right? So if you want more information, visit our website, heydayservices.com, HAYDAY services.com. Click on the training page and it's going to tell you everything you need to know.
Except I'm going to tell you a little bit more because I'm super excited about this. And I really, if you love the podcast or even like us pretty much on most days, I'll take that.
Yes.
That's our training style. That's how we're going to talk things through. It's not this mystical, magical world that only a privileged few can enter. Grant writing is a skill, and we're going to help you get there. So whether it's you yourself that you've just started grant writing, maybe you're a development director and you have fundraising background, but want to brush up on your grant skills, or maybe you are hiring in grant writers who are maybe at the earlier stages of their careers, or you see this as a way to really build some capacity and provide meaningful and fun professional development for the folks on your team.
Or heck, you could be the police officer, the city clerk, the admin assistant, the person who never thought grants was going to be any part of your job until one day the boss looked at you and said, "Hey, you can write this grant for us." And you're like, "Great. I don't know what I'm doing."
Call that voluntelling. You were voluntold to be a grant writer and it fell under the other duties as assigned portion of your job description.
That's like Amanda,
we're here. We're here for you. We are here for you. We're also the Grants Lab. It's done in cohorts, and so the minimum grant size, there's no minimum grant size, but there's a minimum cohort size of 3 and a maximum of 10 agencies. And you can bring as many people from your agency as you want, who are directly involved in grants and would benefit from this, right? The more the people in your agency understand this, that grant writing is not a solo sport, the better off your team is going to be, and it's going to make you truly competitive and just a better match and a better candidate for seeking grant funding. Also, it's going to be Amanda and me. We're going to be teaching. It's going to be
educational. It'll be entertaining. We promise to keep you awake. So that's important for learning. Stay awake.
You probably won't be bored. You might have a heaping helping of knowledge each and every session. And as we audit your past grants, and as you contact us for some regular Ask Us Anythings, but you're probably not going to be bored. I'm just saying. So today we are discussing an important grant-related consideration. We hope everyone joins us for Grants Lab, but even if you're not, this is something very important to think about, and it's right-sizing your organization or helping your client do so that they can handle the grants. Everybody wants the grants, but do you really when it comes to making sure that you have the capacity to manage them well? So we are absolutely thrilled that SNF Writing Solutions is our podcast sponsor for the second half of 2024, season 7, if you can believe it. Founder and CEO Stacy Fitzsimmons, a self-proclaimed data geek, is a seasoned grant pro who's raised and managed hundreds of millions of dollars. She's a certified compression planner, and she has broad management experience across a lot of different industries like restaurants, retail, technology, healthcare, nonprofits, the arts, and state government. She is sharing her decades of experience bit by bit with us, so take a listen. So, Stacy, in our last episode, you shared some of the common mistakes that consultants make. So, how are you helping to fix these mistakes for your clients?
So it's not just with my clients, but also with some of the contractors that I have, and
Right.
um, so I'm attempting to lead by example, um, and I really do establish upfront with clients that you hired us because we're the experts. So kind of having that expectation that we are going to give them the best practice and give them that expertise. I think the other thing is coaching my subs that are also consultants on how we can manage the application process a little bit better than just, oh, we'll get it all done in the last 2 weeks, because that doesn't help anybody. But and kind of staging how the proposal application process goes from the start, so that we have some interim deadlines and those kinds of things. And, blowing a deadline does not mean that you blow the entire proposal, but it does give you a heads up that we need to catch up a little bit. And then also, I think one thing that I do with clients and that I encourage my subs to do is take a step out of comfort zone with different projects, but let our clients know that this is a little bit new for us. We have experience doing similar things, but this will be a new foray for us, and see if that's okay with the client. A lot of times they'll be like, hey, not a problem. Just we want to make sure that you can step up. But if the client decides no, that's not something that they want us to take on, then we can provide some referrals or bring in somebody else with that expertise.
To find out more about Stacy Fitzsimmons and her incredible team at SNF Writing Solutions, visit snfwritingsolutions.com. If you want the tools and resources to up your organization's grant game, check out their services provided page and reach out to them today. So it's always exciting when that big grant award shows up. I know that's always a day I want to celebrate.
That's why you should. That's why you should.
Absolutely. But it is a double-edged sword, right?
Yep.
So while the funding can improve incredible opportunities, it's going to do great things in your community for the people you serve, for the puppies you serve, for whoever, whatever it is you serve, right? But it also brings increased workloads.
I'm sorry. She means taking care of dogs. We're obviously not talking about serving puppies as in enjoy a meal, because how barbaric and wrong would that be? Welcome
Why did you even go there?
Because welcome to my brain. Welcome. 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 That took a dark turn. Please continue, my friend.
So hopefully no dog turns in your life, but in addition,
no dogs were harmed in the making of this podcast. Oh my Lord.
No.
Please continue, Amanda. I'm going to have a drink of water.
Yes.
Thank you.
Funding can be fabulous, but it can be a double-edged sword because it does come with extra roles and responsibilities and workloads. And a lot of times organizations aren't thinking about that. All they have in their head is, we need the money, we need the money, we need the money. Let's go get the money, right? And if you don't stop and think about the implications of what that money is going to bring, as far as implementing your program and financial reporting and tracking and all the documentation and the meetings and the time, and also the impact on all your other programs, right? You could be so focused on this one that everything else falls by the wayside, which is not a good thing either. So you really have to think ahead. It should not just be, oh my gosh, we need $1 million. You really need to think about, can we afford this $1 million? Because you might not be able to.
That is a beautiful thing. Can you afford the grant? I love that. That is so glad we work together. because really there is a cost to getting a grant that
Yeah.
is not, and it's a real cost. It's cost in actual money. It's a cost in staff time. It's a cost in program delivery.
Hmm.
It's a cost in the mental health and well-being of your staff if they're pushed to
Yep.
overload. And I've seen that a lot. I participated in that back in the day. And that's one of the reasons your girl here has her own business and also has Heyday Services with the fabulous Amanda Day, because uh-uh, that is not where I want to live. But it is such I get the temptation, like Amanda was talking about, right? It's like, this federal grant is for $3 million over 3 years. We'll be able to, blah blah, but everyone gets a new car. Or that's obviously not true, but it'll transform. I mean, we really need this money, and it's like, sure, I'm not debating that doing good things in the world at scale is going to cost some money,
Yeah.
you know.
Oh, and let me tell you how many times I have heard a board member tell me it's grants, free money. We should go for it. And I just want to be like, grants are never free money, but so many people look at it from that perspective that's free. But it's even if there's no match, it is not free. There is always a cost involved.
Listen, and it's only free if you're not directly involved in it. So if you are a board member listening to the podcast, thank you for your service, thanks. But please, it's not free money. And it's
No.
not going to be free money if you push your ED and staff to go for grant after grant after grant. First of all, please let them run the business. Please let
Yep.
them run the nonprofit agency, and please provide guidance and help them make important partnerships and fundraising connections in the community. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. But please, please don't push grants just because they're there, or just because it's actually might be easier for someone else to sweat out the details and stay up all night to put that grant to bed, so to speak. And that frees you from having to tell your friends about a nonprofit and make fundraising connections. Okay. Because sometimes I think that's the dynamic. But if you're not a board member and you are a department director or a development director or a senior grant writer, or you're just the person that is hired in to make it rain for that agency, which may or may not be a specific title, but I think you get what I'm saying. It's really make it a part of the grant seeking process. I'm not even talking about post award. Let's think about the implications for the current programs and what effect this will have if you are able to get that grant. You can be a wonderful grant writer and bring in a grant that could drive your agency into the ground if they're not ready to
Yep.
handle it.
Yep. That's so true. So avoiding mission creep or mission drift while being open to expanding.
I like mission drip.
Mission drip.
It's dripping away. Drip,
Yeah. Either way, drift or drip.
either way.
We don't want that, but we do. I mean, obviously, you want to be open to expanding where it makes sense. So you've got to find that balance, and it can be a tricky business. So here are a few factors we'd like you to consider when you're evaluating staff or client capacity for a large grant. Okay.
Lay it on us.
The first one is program management. So if you are going to implement a brand new program, or maybe you're greatly expanding one that already exists, it's going to require dedicated staff to not only implement the actual program and do all the activities you promised, but they're going to have to track progress and ensure compliance with all kinds of grant requirements as well. So you're adding more to their plates. So do you have the staff capacity for that? Or can you ask the grant for new staff to help with those sorts of things? Maybe, maybe
Maybe.
not. Maybe not. It depends. Another thing is financial management. Large grants often come with complex financial reporting and tracking obligations. And especially if you're a new organization, not necessarily a new organization, but if you're new to federal grants, like
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
you've done tons of foundation grants and you're like, oh no, we've done big federal, or we've done big foundation grants. We've dealt with $1 million foundation grant. I see you, and I'm not saying it's not a lot of work because I know it is, but going from the private side of foundation funding to federal grants is a whole different world, and the levels and complexity of management when it comes especially to financial reporting and all the rules and regulations and policies and procedures you're supposed to already have in place it's a lot. And so you want to make sure that you've got all of those things in place. You want to know that you have accountants and other folks on staff who can handle keeping up with all the checks and balances and internal controls and just making sure the money is well spent and well documented. So that's something to consider. Um, Another is the monitoring and evaluation.
Mhm.
Funders typically require some robust data collection. They want to know that you're keeping track of everything, you're monitoring, that you're evaluating the program's impact, and that, that's going to take time to collect it all, to do it all, and then also to package it all up the way the funder wants it and submit it to them in a timely fashion. And again, there are some grants where you are able to hire third-party evaluators to come in and do that work, which is great, but they can't do everything. Even if you hire an evaluator, you're still having to help with that process because it's your responsibility. So don't think, oh, I can just hire all this stuff out. It's not a big deal because it still takes your own stuff.
Someone's going to have to make the donuts, right?
Yeah,
Someone's going to have to
absolutely.
come
Absolutely.
in and gather the data and put it in a place. And sometimes you don't, it's not that you get to hire a third party evaluator, you are required to.
Sometimes.
If you're testing out a curriculum, if you're piloting a new program in a school district, for example, and they're not just going to come in and like magically mind meld with all your participating students and staff and be like, I have all the data I need now. I mean, not yet anyway. I mean, but for now, no, someone's going to have to prepare that and bring it all together. And um, it's for smaller scale grants, not really much of a concern, but yeah, going after these, and it doesn't have to be state and federal,
That's true.
as I'm sure that you're going to get to, right? It's like there can be community foundations, United Ways, national or regional foundations, or just some foundations that are a little too big for their britches when it comes to the kinds of reporting and things that they want. I mean,
That's
frankly,
true.
and
Yeah.
just that can also be a huge burden, not necessarily maybe on programmatic data, but just on the level and kind of reports or reimbursement forms or anything that they may require. So we're
Yeah.
not wanting to scare you away from grants, but it's like,
We want you to know what you're getting into and that you
yeah,
have the
or we
capacity
want
to do
to,
it.
or if there's someone that will not listen to you and you already know all this stuff at your organization, hey, have them listen to this podcast.
There you go.
Hi,
Yeah.
person at the organization, we're for real. Grants are great, but it takes a lot of work.
It
Let
does.
us talk about it. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yep. The last thing I would say is that it just any program needs overall administrative support, and that's no different for grants. Somebody has to make sure that reports are being submitted in a timely fashion because there's deadlines for all these things. You may have to be scheduling different meetings. There's documentation, there's communication. Anytime you want to make changes to the grant, somebody's got to get approval from your funder, and it usually needs to be in writing. So somebody's got to be in charge of that. There's just a lot of moving parts, and you need one person who can oversee that. And a lot of people dump it on their program director, but they're already busy doing the programming side of things. You really do need somebody else, whether they have grant in their title or not. Somebody needs to be in charge of all the administrative stuff. And so if you don't already have a person, and that is one position that I don't know that you can find a grant to pay for. Like you can often pay for staff to do program work. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I have yet to see the grant that's like, yes, hire a person who's going to handle all the behind the scenes paperwork required by this grant and we'll pay for it. I have.
Sometimes you can build in grant management costs depending on, I mean, and you'll find that out in your the notice of funding announcement
Yeah.
or the RFP. But like admin assistants, no, that's usually something that you may have to build into your overhead costs for. And again, it's not a given, and there may be caps on that, but it's yeah, I have not seen a grant that's like, yeah, we'll totally pay for your office manager. You would have to build it into the office manager is going to be collecting the patient surveys, pre and post patient surveys, or the office manager is going to spend 10% of her or his time or their time in the waiting room collecting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You could, but again, then that's 10% of their time committed to something new, and they're already a full-time employee. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is where the sort of that rubber meets the road. It's like, oh, I'll
Yeah.
just build in their time. And I'm like, then what from their job is going to come out?
Yeah. What are they not doing
It's
in its
going to run
place?
them into the ground, because
Yep.
I have worked
Well,
for agencies that do that. It's not
yeah.
nice.
Well, and I've got a good example of this, and I may have told this story before on the podcast previously, but I hadn't been in Alpharetta very long, and we applied for $1 million grant through it. I don't think this program exists anymore, but it used to be called the Transportation Enhancement Grant, or TE grant. It was federal money that went to the state, and then you applied at the state level. So we had requested $1 million to build the next leg of our trail system, and they came back and said, "We'll award you $300,000." Well, it was one of those things that the grant would have been really nice, but one way or the other, we're going to build this trail. So we
Also,
figure some
that's a
things
third.
out.
That's just if you're keeping score at home, that's a third of what they asked for, which
Yes.
is not uncommon.
Yes, they can do that. And of course, I'm still looking at it as, hey, $300,000 is better than nothing, right? So, and which that's how everybody looked at it, like, hey, at least we're getting part of it paid for. So we go ahead and we do some other fundraising things we figure out the difference. And it's a slow process, right? Because you've got to design it first and then you've got to do this. So anyway, so we go through and it takes years for this project to be done. And by the time everything is said and done, we realized it probably cost us more with the grant than it would have otherwise, because we had to go through a lot of environmental processes that we wouldn't have if it wasn't federal dollars. So that made the project more expensive than if we had paid for it 100% out of local funds, right? Because it was federal funds, I had to submit monthly DBE reports and get that documentation from our contractor, which those
What
are
is that?
disadvantaged business enterprise. So a lot of times with construction grants, a certain percentage of the work has to be done by a subcontractor that is a licensed DBE. Um, so it's pretty typical, but there's a report that goes with that. And then of course, federal construction involves Davis-Bacon weekly wage sheets that you have to collect. And if you've got a great contractor who's on top of it, it still is time consuming. But if you don't have a great contractor who is used to doing that, I mean, the amount of time I spent just on Davis-Bacon Wage Act stuff was unreal. And so you start adding up my time and then our construction manager, who was our project director's time. It was one of those things that after it was said and done, we were like, that wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth $300,000. And so it was after that project that we decided if we're going to do federal construction, we want at least $1 million to make it worth our time. Now, that's not like a magic number. I'm not saying that that has to be your number. I have a
And
client I used to work for that their magic number was $2 million. It's kind of a,
and these are large, these are larger
yes. We had 400
municipalities
employees. Yeah, a
with
good, our
with
budget
good
was
tax
$85
base.
million.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we were
This is
not,
not rural Georgia where
no,
you're really the game in town is federal funding or state
yes.
pass-through funding to improve your community. We totally get that.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't know it's not worth it until you've done it yourself, And so again, that's why there's not a magic answer, but it's just some things you may know ahead of time, other things you don't, but it's smart to, when you do get your first big grant, to track everybody who touches the grant, track their time, track how they're spending their time. And you might quickly see like, oh my gosh, that took, how many hours did it take? And then also what was, like you said, what was the loss? What did I give up? What did I not do that maybe I should or should not have been doing?
What grants did you not write
Because I
because
was
you
too
had
busy
to
managing this.
spend 100 hours a quarter on Davis Bacon or whatever it was?
Yeah.
Because I've had board members or other, I'll give them well-meaning, but say, well, that's your job. And it's like, no, my job is to bring in, when I was an employee,
Yeah.
X amount of money to fund these programs, but I need to do that in the most effective way possible. That's like saying to a firefighter, well, your job is to put out fires, so go do it, and giving them a bucket. I mean,
Yeah.
let's think this through. There are
Yep.
probably more effective, efficient, and safer ways to deal with either public safety emergencies or trying to bring in the amount of money that will affect that super positive change.
Yep.
And we've spent a lot of time already, but it bears repeating. So I'm going to repeat it. You're going to have to educate up.
Yeah.
You're just going to have to do that. And it's okay to talk people through. I mean, if they're business people who are elected officials or they're serving on the board, then you can talk about return on investment. You
Yeah.
can talk about hours spent versus return. I mean, these are concepts that shouldn't be that alien to people from that field. If you're working with a founder and executive director who just wants to grow and do and serve, and it's like, yes, we can do that, but it's going to cost a lot on the back end. And
Yeah.
I'm just 100% not here for anybody who's like, but it's your calling. You're doing this because you love it. And it's like, no, we're working together for positive change, but we deserve living wages and lives outside of work,
Yeah.
particularly in the nonprofit sector. And taking a look at, you know, the internal staffing capacity of an organization to handle the grant, not just the grant management, but the actual delivery of the program with if they're not going to bring on new staff. If you play the game of 20% here, you're 10% on this grant, 5% on this grant, which I have seen, like down to 5% on like 10 different grants.
Yeah.
So sooner or later, for me, the question is what it's not a true you're not going to get a true picture of what it takes to deliver these programs if you've got somebody all spread out. I see this a lot of university settings, right?
Yeah.
Where they have maybe programs that include community components. They're more external facing. So you've got faculty members that are actually engaging in programs. The examples that come to mind are maybe psychology, sociology, where maybe there are clinics, maybe there's outreach, different kinds of programs. It's like they're so spread out over all these different programs. It's like you really don't have a true picture of what it would take to run that program um, with like one director, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Because it's all spread out. You
Yeah.
don't know. And then you also can easily run into you have a salaried person whose salary is spread out to the equivalent of 150% of their grant. I mean, of their salary, sorry.
Yeah.
That's not right. Obviously, if you have an okay to pay hourly employees overtime, that's different. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about that. But again, if you're bringing in 150% of someone's salary across 25 different grants, it's not like you're giving them a big fat raise, but it's also wrong, and it doesn't even make sense. And someone is getting shortchanged, and that's usually the communities that you're trying to serve because you got
Yeah.
your employees way too spread out. But failing to allocate for this kind of thing or to take it into consideration, it's going to cause burnout and compliance issues. You could miss future funding opportunities, and ultimately, as I said, you're hurting the communities that you say you're trying to serve.
Yep. True. And it's really better to be honest about your organization's capacity up front rather than overcommitting and then struggling to deliver on the grant requirements. Because I always tell people the best way to be successful in grants is to be successful with the ones you have right now. Manage the
Yeah.
ones you have well, then you're more likely to get the next one. Because if you can't manage it, why are they going to give you another one, right? Um, so I can give you good example of kind of like overreaching. I did a little bit of work. This has been years and years ago. I had helped out a small nonprofit that did. They mostly were doing sporting activities for children. It was like an inclusive baseball program, right? So for kids who are potentially in wheelchairs, walkers, things like that. And they really wanted to have a concession stand. They had a building, or no, they we were trying to do a building that was going to have some bathrooms and then a concession stand. Well, a grant they had found for it would build it, but one of the requirements is then that it had to meet some certain population requirements. So they were going to have to like hire some of the folks that they were serving to work, right? Work in the concession. So anyway, got the grant. They followed all the rules when it came to building the building. Everything was done right. But then for 3 years, they were supposed to track and who was, what training did they get in the facility? How often did they work? They did none of that. And so 3 years later, after this great building they've been using forever, they ended up having to pay back the grant because
Wow.
even though they built the building, they didn't do that component because that's not what they did, right? Ultimately, they just wanted a concession stand. They were not a training and job placement type nonprofit, right? And so that was definitely mission creep. Definitely it was not a good fit for them, and had to pay that back. It was an organization. They would come to the city for advice here and there and some things that they went for, and it was just one of those things that it was just like it just wasn't good. All
Oh,
around.
that's too bad.
So, yeah, very bad. Now, luckily, they were able to fundraise and pay, but it's just that's what you don't want to have happen, because not only do they have to pay the grant back, now if they ever needed that funder, what's the funder's memory of them is they didn't do what they were supposed to do and had to pay the grant back. So the chances of them getting that grant again probably pretty slim. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um so one strategy that some organizations can consider is building the staffing costs into the grant proposal itself. We've mentioned that already. And again, this only works if the grant allows for staffing costs. So don't get me started on funders who insist they only fund programs and not people, because, I don't know about you, never been able to run a program without people to do it, but sadly,
Haven't yet.
yes. So some funders are coming around to this idea that program staff is needed, but there's still so many that don't. So um, program staff costs are often allowable and allocable on government grants, though, which is a nice thing. So I found in dealing with government grants, there are some grants out there that are straight up only for equipment, only for construction, those kinds of things. And if that's the case, they're not going to pay for your staff, right? But there are tons of grants that are specifically built around programs or research or things like those, and they do fund staff. Okay, so I can give you some federal examples. So, for instance, like there's a grant called the Land and Water Conservation Fund, where you can develop parkland. It doesn't pay for staff. So, the purpose of that grant is not for programming, it's literally just to
Purchase.
buy park land. And then if you need to add ballparks, playgrounds, things like that, you can. So it's straight up. So you're hiring a contractor potentially to do some work, but you're not hiring staff. So that's one of those things, the management of it, even though we're hiring a consultant to maybe build the playground, we still had someone on staff in our engineering department who was overseeing making sure they were doing it correctly. I'm still doing all the reporting. Someone in finance was helping with all that stuff. None of our positions were paid for. That was just kind of the cost of doing business. On the yes side, you've got grants like the Department of Justice has the Community Oriented Policing Services grant. That grant specifically is to hire additional police officers. It will pay staff salary and benefits. There's a grant called the 319H grant through the Environmental Protection Agency. It's to help clean up streams and rivers and bodies of waters and things like that. And we were able to use it to fund for some of our staff salaries to help implement the project and the program. So we use their time as an in-kind match to it.
Yeah.
We could have hired a new employee if we needed that through that grant. So it just, again, it depends funder to funder, not even funder to funder, but program to program, which federal grants will and won't pay for staff time. So you just have to read the fine print when it comes to that RFP, NOFA, OFA, FOA, whatever it's called these days, right?
EIO. So being transparent about staffing needs and including those costs and the grant proposal development process upfront while you're writing it can go a long way to making sure that your organization has what they need to successfully manage the grant. It's also super helpful to think about these things when you're answering the often dreaded and often appearing question about sustainability, which is usually like, and what are your organization's plans for sustaining this program after grant funds are expended? Or in other words, what you're going to do when this grant is over, because we do not believe in serial funding because we're a foundation funder who is completely old-fashioned and outmoded, right? Because if you really want that program to continue, people, then why don't you just smack some more money at it? Why don't you do general operating? But it's changing, but we have a long way to go. So answering the sustainability question can just also, in the process of writing the grant, can help and oftentimes determine whether or not you can continue to support that. Because if there is no one willing to, if you're a new grant writer or a new to you organization, and no one is willing to even entertain the, notion of what will happen after the grant funding runs out for a multi-year program, other than to say, well, you'll just keep writing grants. That's the plan. That's not a plan. That's a one sentence answer. It's not going to score you the points in that grant review, and it's just not good business. It's just not good business to not understand where it's coming from. I've seen it time and time again. And Amanda and I spend a lot of time in our trainings with organizations and agencies talking through what are some components of sustainability planning. That's a whole nother subject for a whole nother time, but it is critical when you're figuring out if your organization is right sized to manage larger scale grants.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And chasing those big buck grants that aren't good fits really do more harm than good. In fact, we've got a previous episode about stop chasing the money, because it's just not a successful model at all. So we don't recommend it. But today, specifically, what we're talking about is that proper staffing size is crucial for any large scale grant program. So you want to make sure that you understand and you assess that you've got the staff capacity, you've got maybe the budget available to have additional people hired if that's what's needed to make it work. You've got planning in place for long-term sustainability, and it's ultimately you're just trying to set yourself up for success. Because if you go after those big grants, you aren't the right size for them, you're more than likely going to fail, whether it's you don't do the grant, manage it properly, and they ask you to pay it back, or they cut it off before you can really get going, or whether your staff leaves because they're burnout and they can't handle it. So you just want to make sure that you have all the right people in place, or that you have the ability to grow properly when you get these larger grants. So that's the best way to make the most of grant funding opportunities. Go after the ones that fit, or if you've got some lofty goals, get the steps in place to grow your agency so you have the capacity to handle them.
Yeah, it's something that's so often skipped over, particularly in the flush of fever to get your hands on that big money. It's just, but if you're not managing it or bringing it up and educating people on how to manage it, because a lot of times grant writers aren't in the C-suite, right? But that doesn't mean that you don't have a voice and you can't educate up and use the grant as an example for why this needs to be in place by looking at the reporting requirements. Because it's just, otherwise you can end up with a compliance nightmare, as Amanda has talked about. And it's just better to be realistic about the capacity up front and make those adjustments during the development of the larger scale grant. And that's that.
Thanks again to today's sponsor, SNF Writing Solutions. If you want to learn more about all that Stacy and her team offer in terms of resources, coaching, grant writing, and more, visit snfwritingsolutions.com. Well, there you have it, listeners. Securing a large grant can be exciting, but it can also be scary, because it's essential to consider your staffing implications and make sure that you plan accordingly. Because if you don't, that's when those big grant awards go from exciting to scary real quick.
True, and true. Yep. So join us in 2 weeks when we are going to break down how to write fantastic letters of support. And I am the queen of letters of support. I once wrote more than 40 for a single grant, and I'm here to hold your hand, walk you through it. You can do it.
We'll see you then.
Bye.